On June 4th, 1981, W.J. and Isella gave birth to a handsome baby boy. James Q. Walls was born in Hollywood, Florida. October 20th, 1983, Larry and Cynthia gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Latricia E. Gibson was born in Mulberry, Florida. Latricia graduated high school in 2002, and James graduated in 1999, when James decided to move to Lakeland, Florida, and attend Southeastern University. And in this very building, the Walls love story began.
So, James and I met 14 years ago, and I really didn't know we were going to actually be a thing until right now, you know?
So when I moved back to Lakeland, my mom was telling me about a church called TLC Family Church. And I told her I would go with her to church. And when I got to the church, the pastor introduced dance. She said there's going to be a dance by the children's pastor. I had no idea who the children's pastor was. And she said we're going to have Pastor Latricia dance to a song called Alabaster Box. And I love me some CeCe Winans. This is probably the first time many people would know that, but I love me some CeCe Winans. And so I was like, oh, okay. Then she come walking on the stage, and I was just like, wow, all right. And so immediately I was like, she could be the one for me. I wasn't the one to go around saying that's my wife, but I always thought she could be the one for me. And so after she did that dance, I came back to church maybe some weeks later, and she was asked to preach. So they were like, we're gonna have Pastor Latricia preach. Now, mind you, I had a little crush on Jacqueline Carr. Jacqueline Carr is her name. I had a little crush on Jacqueline Carr, and when I saw Pastor Latricia Gibson, I was just like, I think I found my Jacqueline Carr of Lakeland, Florida. Of course, she's better. However, when I saw her preach, I was like, wow, Lord, my heart's desire is to be with someone who is a minister, someone who is on fire for you, someone who knows their words, someone who knows how to pray. And just in those few moments, and those two occasions of seeing her on the platform, I was like, this girl is on fire for Jesus. And so I was like, man, that's another plus for me. She can dance and she can preach. And when I say she preach, if you ever seen her preach, she brings the fire down. And so I was just like, wow.
James and I met at church, and when we first met, he was a quiet guy and I was a quiet girl. So us kind of being a couple really didn't look like it was going to happen at all. I noticed him in a few young adult gatherings, but I wasn't trying to pursue any guy at all. So I just went about life. I finished college and I was working on my master's degree. I was teaching at the same time and just became children's pastor and was very busy about doing God's work and busy about spending time with church and family. And so life, trying to build a relationship with a guy, that really wasn't in the mix of things for me. Now, low key, I was begging God every day, send my husband Jesus, for real.
Fast forward, I started getting involved in the church. I was on the tech team. I started a ministry called The Journey, and Apostle Shirley Arnold, a shout out to Apostle Shirley, became my oversight. She was my oversight pastor to help me with the journey, and she gave me advice and different things of that nature. And so I started having events for young adults, college students. And one day I saw Latricia at a talent show they had at the church. I saw her perform and do a story. She shared her story. And I'm always asking people to do things, and she calls it the networking in me. And so I guess I was networking at that moment. And so I asked her would she come and minister at the college event. It was a relationship panel and discussion and kind of like a mini talent show. So she came, and there were some other people who actually performed their talents. And then I gave her some chocolate. And if you know me, I don't do chocolate, and so that was a big deal. It probably was rigged, so if you were a part of that, I'm sorry, but she honestly won. She honestly won because her story was amazing.
I had written a original story about my grandfather, and it was a beautiful story about a pecan tree and legacy, and I shared it at a talent show. James happened to be there, and he was inspired, and being the networker that he is, he came to me and asked if I would share that same story at an open mic night that he was hosting for young adults. And so I accepted the invitation, and I read my story again a few months later. And at the end of that event, that open mic night, James came up and thanked all of the speakers and guests for sharing. And then he gave me a box of chocolates. Like, was that pre-planned? I don't know. Anyways, he gave me this box of chocolates and said, thank you for sharing your original story. You did a fantastic job, and you just outshined all of the speakers. And so I love chocolate. He does not like chocolate at all. And I received the chocolates with joy. Went home in my car kind of giddy because this guy has given me chocolate. And then I started thinking about it, like, was that a thing, or was he just being nice? So eventually I went home, start writing in my journal and start praying about it, because I wanted to make sure I was in God's will, his perfect will. And God responded to me, because I was like, Lord, is this just a thing, like a fling, or are we supposed to be a couple? You know, girls, their mind is on marriage from day one when any guy gives them attention. So that was me. But I wanted to put God first. And so I just asked God, what do you want? And a day later or so, God responded to me, and he said, I'm going to put a time of separation between you and James, but you cannot fear and you cannot interfere. And so that was it for me. I heard God, and I knew God, and I knew what he said. And so I put all of my ideas of James and I getting together and being a couple, I put that on the shelf completely, and I forgot about it. And I continued on with life.
And then, so I've been watching her since I came to the church. And so I just had little interactions with her. She's quiet, I'm quiet. And so it was kind of like, I don't know if I'm good enough to approach her. I don't know if I want to approach her. I'm nervous to approach her. So I kind of laid in the background and just watched from afar. And then I had moments where I wanted to approach her. And if you know Pastor Latricia, you know she ain't just going out with anybody. And so I would sometimes utilize other people who wanted to hang with her to see if she said yes. So there was a young lady who was a part of my ministry, The Journey, who was like, Pastor Latricia is amazing. Let's take her out. And I was like, okay. And so we decided to see if she would go out to lunch with us. And I thought she was going to say no. I even told the young lady, I was like, be ready, because she might not do this. And so she said yes. And I was like, cool. And then I get to go too. So we went out to eat, and I was like, I really like this young lady. So like, don't know when I should say this, but I don't want to mess anything up. I don't want to mess up a friendship. So we're going to leave it alone. So I kept quiet. I didn't say much. I had a lot of people, some of you who are watching this are some of the people who was in my ear saying, you should talk to Pastor Latricia. And I was like, And what you didn't know was I wanted to, but I just wasn't sure. And so I was just like, okay, we'll see. And that's what I told most of you, we'll see.
Lots of guys pursued me after that. There was a season back in like 2013. There was a guy who was really interested, trying to pursue me, and I told the guy no, and I was praying earnestly about it, and God finally moved that guy out of the way. And I asked God, what's next for me? And the Lord said, the next guy who asks you out, you need to say yes. I'm like, okay, that could be today, tomorrow, or never, because I go to work, church, and home again. Now, granted, I do have friends, but everybody who knows me, they knows Latricia ain't gonna hang out like that. Anyways, I just focused on God's work, and 7 years passed from the time that God told me that, and I found myself praying again, and that was always a part of my prayer, just asking God to bless my future husband and help me be a great daughter, a great wife, a great sister. And so I was praying and reading in 1 Samuel the story of Hannah, and Hannah desperately wanted a son. And so she cried out. She cried out to God, and God did answer her prayer. After many years of being barren, God answered her, and he used the prophet Eli. He was a priest, and he used Eli to minister to her, to Hannah. And he said, God's going to grant you your request. And that story just so resonated in my spirit, and I started praying and crying out to God, and just really spending time reading that text over and over, and getting my heart just re-inspired on God's promises.
God brought two friends into my life, and God gave me a lot of friends who spoke into my life, but there's two particular friends that God brought into my life, and not knowing that they were even going to speak into my life this way, but they said to me one day, who are you dating? Like, who are you talking to? And I was like, nobody. And I was like, there is no one, like, that's it. And they were like, you have no one that you're interested in. And I was like, well, if I could get a chance, it would be Pastor Latricia. And they were like, go for it, that's awesome. And I was like, it's awesome, but she's not buying it. And so they were like, you never know, you need to try. And so we asked her one day to, again, using other people, we asked her one day to go out with us, her and her sister, because wherever Latricia is, there's Stephanie, and there might be Mama and Daddy. And so we asked them to come. They said yes, and we went to SeaWorld. Everyone but Stephanie and Latricia on that day knew that James was interested in Latricia Gibson. And so they were all trying to figure out ways to get us, just the three of us, together and talk. But I was like, nope, let's let it be natural. Let's not force anything. And then after that, so we went to SeaWorld, had an amazing time. I never said anything to her. I didn't make a move or anything. Most people probably would say, why didn't you? I just didn't feel like I was ready. And I just wanted to get to know her more outside the church. Then fast forward to around Valentine's Day. I knew Valentine's Day was coming up. However, I just was like, I don't know if this is going to be appropriate. I don't know if she's going to shoot me out and be like, no. And so one of my friends said, you should get her something for Valentine's Day. Well, it was 2 days before Valentine's Day, and I wanted it to mail to her house. So that didn't happen. So I started doing little things, like I would go with them to Chick-fil-A. What they didn't know is I had already had Chick-fil-A, and they invited me to come to Chick-fil-A. So I looked forward to going to Chick-fil-A with her and her family all the time. And then one day, one of the friends said to me, well, how's things going with Pastor Latricia? And I said, it's not. Um, and so they were like, you need to try harder. So I was like, well, maybe I'll see if I can get to know dad and we could take dad out. That never happened. And I was just like, okay, God, well, if it's supposed to be, it's going to be. So I just left it alone.
About middle of May in 2023, I was rereading this story of Hannah, and I got quiet, and the Holy Spirit asked me to be honest about James Walls. And I was like, what? Because granted, I told you, like, way back, actually 14 years ago, that's when God said, don't fear and don't interfere. So when God told me that, I didn't want anything to do with James. I was like not trying to sit next to him at church. I wasn't trying to create conversations with him. When it was time for me to park in the parking lot, I knew what car he drove, so I wasn't trying to park near him, none of that. So when God asked me to be honest about James, I told God, no, no. Well, God did not reply. He listened and waited patiently. And so I began to cry. And as I'm crying, I begin to pray. And as I'm praying, I burst out, I am in love with James Walls. And I'm like, wait, what? I've got tears streaming down my face. I'm like, God, what am I talking about? And now that was a big deal because I have not told anyone that I had feelings for James. Like, nobody. I didn't even tell myself. So that was a bit of a challenge. Trying to wrap my mind around all that. Yeah. So I got up, cleared my face, and I said, okay, God, that's between me and you. Like, there's nobody home. Mom and dad are out shopping. My sister is at a training. It's just me and you in this house, and that's it. So I'm not gonna tell nobody. So, yeah.
To like May of 2023, I was on the phone with those two friends that I talked about earlier, and they were like, hey, you want to go out to lunch? And I said, sure, let me see. Well, while I'm saying sure, comes walking really fast. And if you ever seen Pastor Latricia walk, she's walking really fast. So as she's walking towards me, I'm on the phone and I'm like, hold on. She's coming over here to ask me something. Hold on. I put the phone down and she says, would you like to go to lunch with me and my family? And she told me one of the other sisters was coming, and I was like, another moment, I'm gonna take them up on this moment and I'm going. So I went. She still had no idea. We even sat next to each other at the restaurant, and I was like getting dizzy for some reason. It probably was just my happiness on the inside. So then fast forward past that, we went to dinner or lunch. After that, one day for my birthday, I was at church. And if you know what this is, these are really nice when people do this, but I would have never expected Latricia Gibson to do this, but she did, and it really meant a lot to me. She tapped me on the shoulder. She came into the youth room and she tapped me on the shoulder and she said, I'm sorry, Pastor James, I couldn't get much, but here is something for you. Happy birthday. And she gave me a Pentecostal handshake. And I was like, the girl I like is giving me money? Like, this is so weird. Like, what's going on? So I said, thank you. I had already asked her maybe weeks prior to that day, would she be the speaker at our youth conference and that I hold every summer. So she said yes. And I was like, okay, God, this is going to be powerful. The last day of the conference, she also, by the way, she did an amazing job. But the last day of the conference, the Holy Spirit like wrecked the place. Kids were crying out to God. Worship just went on and on and on. We started praying for people. And in the middle of me praying for someone, I stepped back and the presence of God hit me really strong. That happens quite a few times, not all the time. I do sense God's presence, but for me to like be boohooing crying, it happens every once in a while for me. And so I just stepped back and then I laid on the floor floor, and just started I was undone. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, "You walk in fear." And I said, "I don't walk in fear. Do you not see this conference I'm doing? I'm at this college. It's like a big deal. We got 3 or 4 churches here. I'm like bold." And he said, "No, you walk in fear concerning a relationship with Latricia Gibson." And she was, mind you, she's like a couple of feet away from me praying for someone else. And I'm like, "Oh," and I just yell. And tears are rolling down my face. I had some of the leaders around me praying for me. They had no idea why I was crying. And I was like, "Okay, Lord." And so I got up and he said, you need to talk to her. You need to ask her out.
I received a text message from James saying, "Thank you so much for pouring into this generation. Would you mind meeting with me?" And so I'm thinking, why does he want to meet with me? I guess he wants to critique the message that I shared. Okay, you can meet me before or after church on Sunday or Wednesday. How about that? And he just replied, he was like, "Okay."
Because I knew if I said, "Can we go out on a date?" she might not have said yes. So I was like, very, very like, "Lord, lead me on how to approach her." So I said, "Can we meet?" And she said yes. She told me the ways we can meet, which was before church on a Sunday or before church on a Wednesday. And I was like, "Lord, I really wish she would go to a restaurant with me, but I know this is where she wants to meet, so it is what it is." That Saturday night, a storm came in, and that whole story about there's a ram in the bush, there was a ram in the bush for me. So a storm came in. We could not have service in person that Sunday morning. We had service online, and I did not think it was going to happen. So I'm on the phone with these 2 friends that I mentioned several times now. And I said, "Well, God told me to approach Pastor Latricia, and I don't know if it's going to happen now. There's no face-to-face church, and she only wants to talk to me at church." And they said, "Well, you don't ever know. Thanks for doubting God. But if God told you to do this, you need to approach her."
Well, a day later, I get another text message from him that states, "Well, since we're not having like face-to-face church, can you meet me for early dinner?" And I'm like, "What?" Now let me flip back a little bit, because I was instructed by God, the next guy who asks me out, I need to say yes. Well, that was 7 years ago when I heard that. Not one guy approached me in those 7 years, and that was quite odd, because prior to that 7 years, there were guys trying to flock around and ask me to coffee, and I would turn them down and try to get my phone number in the local grocery store, and I'm like, "No, thank you." And so that didn't happen for like 7 years. And so when he sent that text message to me and then got really specific saying, "Would you meet me for dinner?" I'm like, "God, what do I say?" Because this kind of sounds like a date, not like a critique for a conference. So I get on my knees and I'm crying out to God, "What do I do?" And I heard the Lord say, "You need to say yes." And so in faith, I said, "Yes, I will go to dinner with you. Where are we going?"
And I almost fell out of my bed because I was just shocked. And then she said, "Where are we going?" And I told her where we were going to go to have dinner.
I got there with my Bible bag in hand, notebook. I was ready for a unloading of a critique.
And needless to say, she found out it was a one-on-one date with me. And that's when I shared my heart with her on how I feel.
To my surprise, James wanted to share his heart about being interested in me. And honestly, my spirit man still leaps right now. To just know that God's favor and his grace is upon his people, and to just wait on God and he'll take care of every desire. I'm amazed because I had no clue. that he was interested in me, and only God and I knew that I had feelings for him. And so God did it for me, because I was not going to approach him at all. That was never ever going to happen. And so I am thankful for the Spirit of God and the movement of the Spirit, and to be able to partner with God in saying yes to God and yes to being James's wife.
And here we are today.